Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Haworth, step parent counselor and coach. This month's video is about healing from trauma. In particular, healing from divorce and step-family trauma. My guest is Martha Alexander, life coach and spiritual healer. Prior to launching her coaching practice, Martha was a family law attorney, and we're going to hear about that. So I'm eager for us to get started and learn about Martha's healing journey and how she helps others. Welcome, Martha, and thank you for being with me today.
Oh, Susan, thank you so much for having me. It's always fun when we get together.
It sure is. It sure is. Well, let's get started here. Let's dig in.
Let's
So
go.
first things first, how did you make the transition? First of all, what led you to get into family law? And then what led you out of family law? What was that transition like?
So, what led me into family law was my parents got divorced when I was about 8, and I had the stepmother and the stepfather, although not much really impact from my stepfather. He was kind of ancillary for me. I was raised by my dad and my stepmom, and visited my mom. Lots in there, but I had lots of trauma from it and how they did things. And that was back in 1968. So, how they did things then, right? Just wasn't, they didn't know what they didn't know, right? So they kept blaming everything on their attorney, Leo. And honestly, I thought Leo was the biggest idiot on the planet. Even at a young age, I was like, that dude didn't have any common sense. I could do better than that. So that's what I did. I went to law school. I became a family law attorney to make it better, to make divorce a little bit better, because I figured that's the person who screwed up my life, right? In fact, it wasn't, right?
We're
Which
always
is
blaming the wrong person, right?
right. Always blaming the lawyer. And it was kind of when I had a situation with clients that they were having that physical tug of war with their child's body. He called and said, I have his legs, she has his hands. What do I do? And I thought, I am not making as big an impact on my clients. There is so much more emotional going on. I can't even scrape the surface of what is really going on, right? I can yell at them. I can, do any number of things, but it doesn't fix the emotional chaos that they're in and the fact that they're so in their story they can't get out of it. And then I realized that I had some trauma of my own from the divorce, even 50 years later, right? 50 years later, I'm 58, and I'm like, wow, there are some things that still impact me from my parents' divorce. So I went on a journey for myself, mostly, and discovered through life coaching, kind of broke it open, and then realized that I still had a lot of residual stuff. So I started on the spiritual healing journey that I went on, that I now offer, because there's so much stuck emotions that literally, even 50 years later, my parents at the time of their death couldn't see past the divorce. That some of those emotions were still stuck, and it was so unfair to them and to all of us, right? That those emotions are just stuck, influencing every decision you make.
Yeah, interesting. That such a great story, Martha. And as you know, many of our listeners are stepmoms.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes they're divorced dads, but they're in a step family.
Yeah.
And many of them either have been through trauma or are currently traumatized by their step family relations.
Oh yeah.
And I wonder if you could speak to that, and what you grew up in two step families.
I did. Mostly though, again, mostly it was my dad and my stepmom. Because by the time I lived with my mom when I was in high school, my stepdad was gone. So I didn't really have, which is a good thing, much space with him. But I know my stepmother very well, and I understand, I'm sure she was quite traumatized by coming in, right? She came in at 24. My oldest brother was 16 and I was 8, right? It's my oldest. My dad and mom had 4 kids, and they separated us. So the middle 2 went with my mom, and the oldest and the youngest stayed with my dad. Long story there, won't get into it. And about a year later, both my parents were remarried. And, here's the deal. I guess I used to torment her because I'd come into the kitchen and say something to the effect of, don't get comfortable, my mom's coming back. And that was, of course, her biggest, I was 8. That was her biggest fear, right? And I don't think I meant it maliciously. I really don't think I wasn't a malicious child. I think it was just my hope and my dream, that which all kids have, that their parents are going to get back together. And I don't know that there weren't step parent counselors. There wasn't someone there to help her with this situation. And sometimes it got so bad for her that when she and my dad fought, anytime she and my dad fought, she said, we're getting a divorce. Because it was so bloody difficult. And our family is rambunctious. We're boisterous, we're direct, we're sarcastic. That's just who we are. We can behave when we need to, but that's the family she came into. And my grandmother wasn't very helpful either. My grandmother was pretty much no, he's mine. So about my dad. So it was a really difficult situation for her to come into. I look like my mom in a lot of ways, and my dad was still pretty traumatized, and was, like I said, until the day he died. So, man, do I get the difficulty as I look back on how hard it was for her to be, right, part of that family. And it's not just, right, she had a son from a previous marriage that she brought in. My dad adopted him, so he's my little brother. And it was hard for her to balance, right, or her child's needs with all of us, right? It was a really difficult balancing act. And it was so much easier for her to spread that love and that attention to the one she knew the best, right? And who didn't have history with someone else.
Right. And I understand you are now very close with your stepmom.
I am. She, my dad passed in February of 2020. And the last promise I made to him was that I would always take care of her. That, if she needed to live somewhere, she could always live with me. If she didn't want to go into assisted living. And I mean that. I mean, she's been a mother figure, right? My other mother, whatever that looks like, right? My other mother for 52 years now, 53 years now, right? She's been my mother for a very long time. And there are a lot of things, a lot of characteristics. So I want your listeners to know, I want stepmoms to know that even if you feel like your stepchild is ignoring you, doesn't like you, doesn't respect you, they're still absorbing traits of yours for good or bad, right? Whether it's the yelling, whether it's the, I was a fishwife for a while, or whether it's love of animals, right? Whether it's passions that they have, sewing, whatever it is, right? They are absorbing pieces and parts of you, because no matter what they say, you are that mother figure in their life. And it's okay that they are struggling with that. It is a real struggle for kids. But yes, of course I love her. In fact, I just got back from a trip visiting her. I went back to Iowa to see her and to do some stuff for her. And
Yours, Martha, is a story with a happy ending, and I say that in quotes, right? And sometimes my clients ask me, well, will I ever get really close to my stepchildren? Will they love me? Will I learn to love them? And I wish I had that crystal ball that I could say for sure, yes, you will.
Yeah.
We don't know. And what do you think it took for you to cross over and maybe forgive her?
There
Whatever
were,
it took.
yeah. So there are a lot of my brothers will not cross that line. They are cordial to her as my father's wife, but they don't have the fondness that I have, but most of them never lived with her. I think for me, it took seeing it from her point of view. I think it took me thinking how hard that must have been, right? Because I know my family really well, how hard it must have been. My father was kind of Switzerland. So if there was a debate or an argument or whatever between me and my stepmom, my dad would go to his office and shut the door. It's like, oh, no, dude, you don't get to do that, right? So he checked out. So it was not, so she didn't really have the authority, and yet she did. She had all of it. And for me, what it took for me was just simply forgiveness, just being able to say, it doesn't matter. She's been my mother for this many years. These are the good things that I got from her. These are the things that I need to get rid of that I don't want in my life. Because at some point, when you're an adult, you got to make a choice, right? Are you going to move forward and just forgive and not worry about it? Or are you going to hold on to it? So for your clients, though, I do have a couple pieces of advice, if I may.
Go for it.
One of the things that happened in my family that is still occasionally nicks at me, I'm not going to say triggers me, but it still kind of bugs me, is that from her perspective, she had this beautiful family of 3, right? My mom, her, my dad. See, I call her my mom, my dad, and my little brother, right? Because at some point I moved out of the house to find out who my mom was, because I didn't really know. And my grandmother told me she was horrible. That's another thing. Don't badmouth the other parent. It's really bad. It's not cool. And so she had this family of 3, and they live in a fairly small community in Iowa. They moved from Des Moines, Iowa, to a smaller community in Iowa. And I would go back and visit, and they'd introduce me, right? This is our daughter, Martha. And their friends would go, man, I didn't even know Jack had a daughter. And that really cut deep, right? That was a deep cut, that people that they knew and spent a lot of time with didn't even know that the 4 of us existed. And that is something I would never wish on anyone. That is one of the hardest things to forgive, right? Is the kind of the wiping of the existence, and for my stepbrother, my brother, it was really hard, because he had this family, but then he also had me, because I grew up with him, and he knew that the boys were there, and he idolized the older brothers. And he had, this is one family, this is another family, and it was kind of separated. And only recently has it all kind of come that we're all one big family, because it was always kept separate. And I always thought that was so stupid. What happened in my dad's house had to be secret from what happened in my mom's house, and what happened in my mom's house I couldn't share in my dad's house. And it's like, people, and now I can't even keep a secret. I can for my clients, but now it's like, don't ask me to keep it. Just don't tell me if you don't want me to know. If you're not my client, I don't need to know your secrets.
Yeah.
Don't need to know them. That's a burden.
So what was the relationship like between your birth mother
Mhm.
and your stepmother?
So, originally it was really bad, right? Because, taking my dad's side that, and my mom did some shitty things. Full ass, full out. My mom did some bad things. Cheated on my dad and some other things that really impacted my dad hugely emotionally. And so uh, bonus mom took that, and took my dad's side, which she should have as the husband, right? But they could never quite connect. They couldn't do it. And we spent so long hearing my mom say bad things about my stepmom, and my stepmom saying bad things about my mom, and my dad saying bad things about my mom, and then my mom, wanting to justify, and so telling me all the bad things that dad did. Keep in mind, I was pretty young, and don't think I ever need to know a lot of the details of my parents' marriage and the dissolution of that marriage. Nobody ever needs to know that. So they didn't get along until about, gosh, how long have they been married? 10 years ago. So I'm 62. So I must have been
Really?
52. I must have been 52.
Wow.
And we're in Virginia at my oldest nephew's wedding. And my mom is staying with us, and my husband, my 3 kids, and me, and we had 2 connecting rooms. She's staying with us, and my dad and mom have a separate room. and and my mom evidently went over there to complain that I was being kind of a bitch and difficult to get along with. And I went over there to complain that my mom was pushing my buttons, and I was ready to strangle her. My mom and I had a lot of buttons. Keep in mind, when I was 8, one day or 7, one day I came home from playing, and my mom and 2 of my brothers were gone. So we had issues. My mom and I had issues. We became very close at the end, but we still had buttons that we could push pretty easily. And y'all know what I'm talking about. It's not a secret. And so I was in there, and bonus mom, my dad is sipping, it's cocktail hour. He's sipping his scotch. My brother is in there, and I'm just like, I'm gonna kill her, and I'm about to send her over to my brother's room. And she says, you know what? We have 2 beds in here. She can just sleep in here with Jack and I. And I swear to God, it was the funniest thing. I fell on the floor, almost peed my pants. My brother was rolling on the bed. My dad spit out his scotch. And she's like, what? It's not that big a deal. And I'm like, there was a point in my life when she said, Martha said 1 year for Christmas. All I want for Christmas is to my family to be one family and for everyone to get along. That is all I want. That's all I've ever wanted. And from that day forward, she really made a concerted effort to do that. Now, my dad would never have been okay with my mom sharing their room.
Right.
But it was so funny that, we called all of our brothers. Can you believe it?
Yeah.
It was just, and from that day on, they just got along.
Isn't that interesting? What do you think prompted that? Was there anything, it was just a natural maturation or
At some point, because all like my graduation from law school, everyone was there, all of my family was there, and it was the most miserable dinner of my life because it was like Civil War. My mom made a comment to my dad that was snarky, and I made a snarky comment back defending my dad, and then my brothers it was just ugly, right? And all of my brothers, like weddings and whatever, there were always issues, right? Either about the photos or about where they were sitting or whatever it was. We had to go through so much just to make everybody else comfortable that we kind of lost the joy of events, right? And if it's my event, then my brothers are on parent duty dealing with it. If it's one of my brother's events, the others of us are on duty dealing with parents and making it okay. And we got tired of it. We just finally, it broke. And for my wedding, I said, here's the deal, people. You either get along. I will hear no complaints from this wedding. None. If you need something, you let me know what you need from at my wedding, what pictures you need, and I will add them in. If there's something else you need, you just let me know. If the first person who tells me that there is an issue will have second dibs on baptisms, birthdays, graduations, or whatever else of my children. I'm not putting my kids through what I have been through with you. So you either figure it out or you don't, and you will be on the outskirts of the rest of my life. And that is a decision you get to make.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if you know this, Martha. I think a lot of the listeners will know this. I've been on a mission to untangle the web that holds biomoms and stepmoms in a constant state of contention, friction, animosity. It's following the general casting, if you will, that we're in that role. And so it's always interesting to hear stories of how people let it go. Because we're putting all our energy in the wrong place
Totally.
when we start to build a case and continue to build a case against our stepkid's mom. And this doesn't mean we have to have lunch with them. It doesn't mean we have to invite them to share a room with us, a hotel room.
Not a good idea.
No, no, I don't recommend it, but to release that anger. And speaking of release, I do want to ask you about your work. And I want to ask you what you do, how you help your clients. And I know that they're primarily adults who have been through their own childhood traumas, right?
Yeah, I do adults, adult children of divorce, right? Who are also more than likely to get divorced themselves. The rate is really high for that. My brothers can attest to that. Well, two of them, two out of five of us can attest to that. What happens with emotions is we get our emotions when we're at the formative years, right? You already know this. Between 0 and 7 is when you get them, and then your subconscious mind puts up bumpers like at the bowling alley, right? And nothing gets in there unless there's a huge trauma. And those emotions sit there and they gain, right? So you have an emotion. Let me give sad as an example, right? I'm sad my parents divorced. You have a strand of sad, and every time you feel strand, you get a new little bead, and all of a sudden you get triggered with sad, and you go through the entire film, right? The entire history of sad in your life, and you feel it, and you're in your stories, and you're in your story, and you're in your head, and you cannot get out of that emotion. I go in, I put my clients go through a guided meditation, and I reach down and we grab that strand of sad, like it's a dandelion weed, and we pull it out and we throw it away. And sad isn't in your memories anymore. Your memories are all of a sudden without that charge. They're neutral. You can remember things happy, but you're not going to get sad in that anymore because it doesn't exist in your body anymore. It isn't attached to your memories. So that people can be in the present and actually deal with emotions the way they're supposed to, right? The way in the present. So it keeps you in the present. The past doesn't continue to rob you of your present and your future, and you're not worried about the future.
Right.
You're just not. It's a Zen brain. It's a beautiful place to be.
When I work with my clients, my stepmoms in particular, I hear that some of the trauma that they're currently experiencing may date back to their childhood.
Yeah.
And I know that was true for me. For example, one of the dynamics that happened in my step family is I was ignored.
Mm,
So no eye contact, no engagement, just kind of being ignored. In my family of origin, that is the worst thing that could have happened to me. That is such a trigger because of what happened in my family of origin. And so right away, I was back to being 8 years old.
and there's nothing worse than going back to those feelings. Nothing worse.
Yeah. So I encourage everybody to to look at their childhood trauma,
Yeah.
which we all have, you know,
Yep.
every single one of us.
Doesn't matter how amazing your parents were or how
Yeah.
amazing your childhood was. There's stuff there because your 4-year-old brain didn't understand
Sure.
no, or didn't understand whatever it was, whatever reason that happened. Could have been perfectly good reason, but your brain didn't understand it.
Yeah. And so we get triggered by we get catapulted back to
Yes.
those feelings. And that's, there's so many reasons that being in a step family is difficult. There's so many reasons for that. Um, but we have to take responsibility for our own triggers and our
Yeah.
own emotions. That's all we can take responsibility for.
It is. That's all you have control over is what you do and how you whether you react to something or whether you take intentional action.
Yeah. Yeah. So was there something I didn't ask you that I should have, though, about the work you do or about, step families as you know it from your own experience?
So I think that if my stepmom had the ability to look at her childhood and to resolve issues and conflicts and things that she still has today, because she won't let me deal with that. My dog has something to say about that too. Pardon him. Romeo. Sorry about that. So it would have been better even if she had just taken when I did something silly, or here's the deal. Here's my biggest secret. I empty the dishwasher. I empty the top first, which makes absolutely no sense because the glasses have the water on it and it spills, and then you have to dry everything down below. I always have. I probably always will empty the top
That's
first.
forgivable, Martha.
So I was literally grounded for 2 years straight because every time I did it, I got grounded for a week.
Whoa.
So, and it's like, if you just take a breath, something that annoys you or something that isn't your way, if you just take like 3 different breaths, right? 3 deep breaths before you respond, right? And if you take some time, even just by yourself, before even that happens, just like, I've been to Weight Watchers, I'm sure many women have. They teach you, right, to prep for Thanksgiving or the holiday buffet or whatever. You imagine it, you know what you're going to do, you know how you're going to proceed with it. You're going to drink water, more water to fill up. You know what you're going to do. Doing the same thing with how you're going to show up as a stepmom. Who do you want to be as a stepmom? Because frequently our emotions make us not the person we want to be, right? They put us in this ugly place that we don't want to be, and we're unhappy. The kids are unhappy. The husband's unhappy. It's just a miserable place. And it's not your fault. It's not their fault. It really isn't. If you take just a few minutes, maybe a half an hour, and decide how you want to show up as a stepmom, who you want to be, and then take some notes about what that means, what that means in terms of behavior, in terms of actions, in terms of how something's going to go out, and place some things that you know are going to happen, because kids are kids. They're going to do it. They're either not going to make their bed. And if that drives you nuts, for me, it was like when my kids drove me nuts too, just so you know, and they're not step kids. Shut your door, right? Just shut your door. I don't care. I just don't want to see the mess. Don't care what you live in, as long as I don't have to see it, right? So just taking, what can you do to make it okay with you? Or how do you want to, what action do you really want to take? What do you really want to do about it? And is it really that important? Is that your fight? Right? Because not all things need to be that. Some things can just be left up to dad.
A lot of things can be left up to
Just
dad.
leave it up to dad. He's the one that's responsible. And know that someday, I truly believe, if you are the best you can be, right? If you take action and not react, and you're kind, someday that is absolutely going to pay off.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I first of all, I want to second the motion. I always say doors are stepmom's best friends. Close the door. And then, you can only take responsibility for how you act. And I tell people, write, don't react. Write it down and deal with your journal, between you and your journal, and don't react as best you can. I mean, we're human sometimes.
We are human, and I react now sometimes.
Exactly. And then, we can't predict how other people are going to react. They have to do their own work.
They do. And
so if they come around the way you did, which is beautiful, that's icing on the cake. Yeah. So tell me, and tell our viewers how they can get in touch with you.
So my phone number is 925-899-3882. My email is marthadalexander@gmail.com. That's MarthadAlexander@gmail.com. And my website is courageouslyoucoaching.com.
Beautiful. And of course, I will include that also for people when I send it out, this video out. Lovely. And I want to thank you so much for being here today and for imparting your wisdom. I really appreciate it, Martha.
Oh, Susan, I really appreciate having the opportunity to talk to you and talk to stepmoms. It is, I believe, the hardest job there is.